If you're enjoying Pigoted Podcast, then why not sign up to our Patreon? You can find it at patreon.com/pigoted, and on there you get loads of extra benefits, such as early access to episodes. You get access to Pigoted Extra, which is extra content from our guests, usually about 45 minutes to an hour long of extra content every single week. You get merchandise, you get to ask questions, you get to be part of our Discord community. We have a Discord server where people chat and ask questions and discuss topics that have been brought up on the podcast. You get all that through Patreon, and it starts from just £3 a month. Plus, you'll be supporting the podcast. You'll be helping the podcast to grow, helping us to fund bigger and better guests and to pay for all the editing and that kind of thing. So please, if you are enjoying Pigoted, then think about signing up and becoming a Patreon from just £3 a month over at patreon.com/pigoted. Welcome to Pigoted Podcast. Joining me today is the one and only Dr. James Crossland. Hello.
Hello.
James, just as we get started, what is your area of expertise?
I am a historian of conflict, propaganda. I dabble in intelligence, history, and right now I'm writing a book about the origins of terrorism in the 19th century.
Fucking love it. Already this is going to be a great show. And joining us as our comedian is fucking nobody yet again, because we've been track and traced again. This is the second time that this has happened in 5 episodes. So either I am ridiculously unlucky, or COVID is being used as a convenient excuse, or a bit of both. Have you, before we get started, have you ever used COVID track and trace being bleeped as an excuse to get out of something you don't want to do?
I haven't, and I'm probably in the minority for doing that.
Have you not?
No, I haven't.
I used it yesterday. I used it yesterday as an excuse.
Well, this is karma, isn't it?
This is for every time you use it as an excuse, someone uses it as an excuse against you.
It goes round and round.
And that's how the universe rectifies itself.
That's how it does.
Do you know what I did? It was, so I'm buying a house at the moment, and it is a fucking nightmare because everywhere that is even remotely decent gets bought up straight away. So went to see somewhere last Wednesday, and it was a nice place. It was right at the top end of our budget, but it was really, really nice. And I asked, at the end, I was like, have you had any offers? And they said, yeah. They said, look, it's been on the market since yesterday. We had 3 offers yesterday. And the people who are who are coming to see it after you have already put an offer in, and they haven't even seen it. I was like, fuck, that's literally where you're at the moment. So we put an offer in. We don't expect to hear anything. That's the end of that. But what happens is you go home and you get desperate because you go, shit, we need to live somewhere. So you start lowering your standards considerably. Now, at the moment, there's a lot of people buying properties, but there's also quite a lot of a certain type of property that is on the market. And that certain type of property is old woman's house. Because say what you want about COVID, it has wiped off a certain generation of householders. So there's a lot of old ladies' houses, and you start to look at them, and the way that your brain goes is you start to go, yeah, we could do that room up. We could do that up. We could do that up. I am not a DIY person. I can put up a shelf, I can put up a telly, I can put up some curtains and stuff. I can't fucking...
You're going to become one. You're going to have to.
Well, this is it. I just can't do, like, fit a kitchen. It just doesn't work.
Oh, that's a bit much, but you can strip, old person wallpaper off the wall, yeah?
You can get one of those... it's like a dehumidifier type thing, isn't it? It's like a steamer, and you no,
not with that. If we're talking about old people wallpaper, that stuff is like an inch thick. You need to get in there with the scraper.
The historian of wallpapers.
Yeah, it's rough.
Yeah, because back in the day they did things to last.
Yeah,
didn't they?
yeah,
like
and to hide sins. Because that's the other thing. If you take that wallpaper off, you find. I know someone bought a house. I think it was in Bootle. And when they took the wallpaper off, they found that the insulation was old copies of the Mercury.
Really? Newspaper insulation?
Yeah.
Mate, to be fair, if it's a house in Bootle, it's probably fucking structural wallpaper.
Yeah, well, it did give them pause for thought, to be honest, when they were looking at it, like, oh, God, why is this newspaper here? It'll happen.
Isn't that like a a fire hazard waiting to happen.
Oh, it's all manner of hazards waiting to happen. Rats like chewing on newspaper, mildew, God knows what else. This is what you've got to look forward to.
It's fucking incredible. I mean, yeah. Well, this is why I cancelled it, right? Because I had a moment of panic where I was like, "Fuck, I need to live somewhere." And then I looked at this house in Shevington, which is sort of near Wigan Way, and it is horrible. It's absolutely horrible, but it's like about 60 grand below what I could realistically afford. And so I had my fucking homes under the hammer moment where I was like, we could just do this up. We could just knock through this wall here. And then in the cold, hard light of day, 2 hours before the appointment, I was like, I can't do any of this. Why am I even fucking viewing this? So I rung up to cancel it. And the estate agents have no sort of like manners or decorum whatsoever. So the woman's like, why are you cancelling? And in my head, I'm like, it's fuck all to do with you. Because I don't want to go. Fuck off. Do you know what I mean? I don't have to explain myself to you, Linda. But instead, I was like, I didn't want to say, look, the reason that I'm cancelling is because I'm not good at DIY.
This house is garbage.
Yeah. So I was like, oh, unfortunately, I've been track and traced. And I felt like such a prick.
But yeah, as you say, everyone's doing it. Everyone's doing it, so it's fine.
Yeah, well, there's comedy clubs at the moment are suffering massively. I've got friends who own comedy clubs, and one of my mates was saying that especially with the football being on over the weekend and England doing well and stuff, loads of people have mysteriously been track and traced and want a refund.
Yep.
So there was a thing, was it last weekend when England played Ukraine? Again, if this is obviously going to come out at a later date. So people, it wasn't last weekend. At the time of recording, it was last weekend when England played Ukraine. There was a friend of mine he was getting loads of, we've been track and trace. We bought tickets on the site. We've been track and trace. We need to refund. And he said, look, as per the terms and conditions on our website, we're not offering refunds, but we will reschedule your tickets. And so the woman went, well, we could do Friday. And he was like, liar, fucking liar, lies, cheeky bitch. So go over it again for me. You're a historian that is special. You're writing a book at the moment on terrorism.
Terrorism in the late 19th century. That's the time when terrorism, as we understand it, develops, basically.
Really? So in my head, terrorism as we understand it starts with like the Iraq War. Like that's literally, it's like a 20-year or maybe, I guess if you were born a bit earlier than me, I guess you would look at the IRA and the Troubles and stuff like that. So I'm sort of like, maybe, when was the Arndale Centre blown up? Like 94 or something? Yeah,
modern stuff.
I'd have been like, oh, modern stuff, not your bag. But I'd have been like, a child when that happened. So I think of terrorism, I think of like the Iraq War and then on. But you're saying 19th centuries when it's 19th centuries 18.
Well, if we're put to go with what you're saying about the IRA, so the first Fenian bombing campaign in this country happened in the 1880s.
Really?
Yeah, dynamite bombing. At that same time, you've also got anarchists starting to throw bombs in France, in the United States. You've got nihilists who are Russians who want to kill the Tsar, who do kill the Tsar with the dynamite bomb in 1881. And all this is kind of happening, across a number of nations pretty much within the same time period. And they're all kind of using similar. They're all learning off each other. All these people, they're learning ways to create new types of bombs, how to use them. They're learning the effect of terror, being able to, what's the effect of planting a device, blowing it up in a public place. What does that do in terms of public and police responses? The basic mechanics of how terrorism is meant to work. The object not being necessarily to kill people, but to frighten people. And I mean, to the point on that, the Fenian bombings in the 1880s, most of them were designed to not kill people. They were set off. Yeah, well, they used timers a lot with some of the bombs. I mean, there were different stages of it, but they used timers in some instances so that they could detonate a bomb at 3 a.m. outside barracks or a tube station or whatever else.
Oh, so it wasn't like we're going to try and kill you. It's look what we can do. We could kill you if we wanted.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes. I mean, there were other instances where bombs were set off in more public spaces, and people were killed and injured. But by and large, the actual amount of bloodshed caused by that bombing campaign was pretty minimal. But the terror of it was massive, and that's where this kind of intersects with the other aspect of this, which is the newspaper coverage, which is what I've been quite interested in, because the newspapers of that era. And this is a similar lesson, I guess, to the terrorism one. Just as terrorism didn't start in the 21st century, nor did fake news, because there was a lot of coverage of terrorist attacks at the time. It was eerily similar to the way in which terrorist attacks are covered today, where there's a lot of speculation, hyperbole, sensationalism. And back in the 19th century, a lot of these terrorist attacks were met with just outright lies in the press that scared a lot of people and inflated the threat of terrorism a lot.
Really? So I mean, I always think with newspapers is like going to like the COVID pandemic at the moment. I think that like the newspaper, the way the media has acted has been like the worst, because it's been all about like, I mean, I've always thought, and you're probably going to, as is always the case on this podcast, I have a thought that I think is totally correct and immutable, and an expert goes, that is total bullshit, and I have to rethink my fucking thought system. I've always thought that back in the day, newspapers were designed to spread information, and they were not nearly as sensationalist as they are today. Whereas newspapers nowadays, it is literally all about, well, it used to be all about selling newspapers. Now it's all about clicks. It's all about clicks, because the more clicks, that's the more money you can get for adverts. And because no fuckers buy in print media anymore, it has to be all generated online. And so the way I see it, especially with COVID, and you've seen it so much, I think, over the past 12 months, is bad news sells way better than good news. Oh, yes. So if you say, like, guess what? The average age of death for COVID is 82, and the average age of death for normal people is 81. So extra year. Do you know what I mean? Like that doesn't sell as many papers as, oh my God, a man in Switzerland has just sneezed twice, and that could be the new Swiss variant. It's like it's like, because they're so arsed about creating clicks to generate advertising revenue, then it's almost like the point of media or the point of newspapers has gone out the window now, because it's not about disseminating information, it's about creating revenue.
Well, they've always been about disseminating information, but to your point about having to rethink stuff, media is more regulated now than it has ever been. It was when mass media first started. I know, I agree totally that media is obviously built around, what could we sell that's terrible and that people will want to hear. That's obviously the force that drives the thing, but that has always been the case. And back when we're talking about the time that I'm looking at, and even going further back with the sort of the penny presses and so forth that start developing in the early 1800s, the idea was always to sort of bring people in with sensationalist stories. And there's a reason why it's in this period that we get what's usually looked at as the first great fake news hoax, really, of the modern era. It occurs in 1835 in New York. There's a newspaper called The Sun, which is pretty well, this one's quite reputable.
It's not the same Sun.
No, the New York Sun.
The New York Sun. Jesus Christ.
And so you have this newspaper that's been around for a couple of years.
American tits on page 3.
Well, here's the other. Well, here's the other thing.
Some 18th century ankles.
The other thing that the other thing you notice when you start looking into newspaper history is how much the names are recycled. The Sun, the Telegraph, the Daily, the whatever.
Why is that? I just love the idea, by the way, of like a woman in like a really long skirt just showing a bit of tiny little bit of
ankle.
lower leg.
Yeah.
You know, this is Annabelle, and she believes that Queen Victoria is the best monarch.
But so this newspaper runs this story, saying that we have got information from a world-renowned astronomer who was real, a fellow called Sir John Herschel. Sir John Herschel has sat down at his telescope, which is obviously a fantastic telescope because he's a world-renowned astronomer, so he's got the best telescope. And he's told us about what he's seen on the moon. And they run this story, and it's fully illustrated. And there's humans with bat wings. There's big lakes. There's like these Greco-Roman temples. There's jungles. There's bison. I think there's like flamingos in there somewhere. There's all, and it's all happening on the moon. They're all just hanging out on the moon.
What a weird assortment of things. There's also, I love how humans on the moon wasn't quite weird enough for them.
They needed
so
bat
they went,
wings.
Bat wings.
Needed wings.
They have bat wings as well.
You know,
And there's flamingos up there.
There weren't any horse and carts on the moon, so they needed to get around by flying. That was
riding the flamingos through the jungles.
Yeah, they weren't that creative. they were only that creative. You're that creative, but they put out this daft story, fully illustrated, as I say, and
is there any way that you can see that picture of them fully illustrating?
Oh yeah,
a moon full of jungles and bat wings and flamingos.
Yeah.
Is there? You can Google that.
Oh yeah.
Fucking
you can find it.
Brilliant.
Can find it. Yeah,
I'm doing that as soon as I finish.
Widely available. Any newspaper archive will have that picture in it. To be honest, because it's pretty famous.
Is it?
Yeah, pretty well.
That sounds amazing.
It's worth looking at. It's crazy.
It's my next tattoo.
Yeah. And so the thing about it is, right, they don't just put out this silly story. They put it out and they attach this credible expert's name to it, which is a classic fake news tactic, which you still get to this day. Such and such a reputable person says this, ergo it must be true.
Yeah.
And they print this, and most people see it for what it is and go, well, this is obviously rubbish. But the fact that they've mentioned this astronomer Herschel in there does plant a seed of doubt in some people. It's like, well, he's a real guy. So and this must be something here. And I mean, it doesn't go anywhere. I mean, obviously the reason why they did it was for what was the early 1800s equivalent of clicks. You know, it was to boost circulation.
It's not like as well, like now, if you do something like that, then it doesn't take much for that celebrity astronomer to tweet and go, I never fucking said this, there's shit all on the moon, go live your lives, tweet. But back then you had to fucking write a letter with a quill and stamp on the back with some wax or something like that and then send it to the townsfolk.
Well, he eventually did say, because he was asked about it quite a bit, he did eventually say, you know, I don't really like my name being attached to this. But this was a relatively new thing, so I don't think people quite knew how to react. You know, there had always been hoaxes, there had always been fake news. If we're talking about fake news as this idea of putting out a falsified information under the guise of it being real, that's as old as the hills. That's as old as human civilization. We've been doing that since day dot.
Okay.
But this idea of it being perpetrated on this scale for what was clearly a very mercenary sort of financial gain was relatively new. And that's why when we talk about the sort of history of fake news, this is a key point. This is the first sort of modern instance of fake news as we understand it today. It's the start of the sort of tabloid philosophy of journalism where it doesn't matter if it's garbage, print it and people will buy it.
Yeah, I'm guessing, I mean, was this massively successful? Did loads of people buy this?
That we're not really sure, to be honest. And there's debate on that. Some people say, the circulation went up. Others were like, well, it only became famous after the fact.
But, so if you're the very first person to do this, right, how did your editor sign off on that?
A lot of this was hoaxes were not... Hoax letters and hoax stories and things are actually quite popular at this time. There's an interesting epilogue to this story, actually, which emphasizes this point. So Edgar Allan Poe is kicking around at this time. he gets very annoyed about this story because he reckons that the newspaper has pilfered one of his stories. He wrote a story about this man having this fantastic voyage to the moon. He gets there and it's all weird. And at the same time, and he said, they've stolen my idea. They've taken money out of my pocket.
Flamingos on the moon. That's my fucking
this is my jam, yeah. And so he wrote a riposte hoax a couple of years later. That was where he put his own sort of fake news story out, saying that a man had completed a transatlantic balloon flight in 3 days. It was like the fabulous balloon adventure, and he did it to kind of get back at them and to sort of cash in himself and to sort of prove a point that these newspapers print rubbish.
Do you know what's funny is the balloon one. I'd believe that now. For me, I'm like, oh, did he really?
Well,
the moon thing, I know is bollocks, but I've no idea how quickly balloons go. So I'm like, yeah, maybe.
Well, I mean, it's at this time, the balloon is this, fantastic kind of concept, and he's leaning into that and presenting. I mean, his story came with like diagrams and sort of scientific explanations of how this was done.
He's overselling it.
Well, he went all in to prove that point that if you add a legitimacy to things, if you add a veneer of expertise to this daft story, then people will buy it. And again, this is how fake news works to this day. If you just come out and say something, then whatever. Sadly, that is all that's needed sometimes. But for really sophisticated fake news, you always need to have a sort of, it's that old adage of, the best lies, the most believable lies are always buried amongst truths.
Yeah.
So,
isn't it mad how we have like April Fool's Day. Every year now on April Fool's Day, every news outlet feels this bizarre urge to print the most fanciful story. And everyone knows it's bollocks. We all go, aha, April the 1st, fake, didn't get me that time. And you think, well, we have it in us. Do you know what I mean? We have it in us to call bullshit.
Yeah.
And yet we lose that. Come 12 o'clock, we lose that discerning ability.
That is the one day of the year where we're able to just go, oh, yeah, we actually understand stuff and we can call this out.
And then April the 2nd, we read man's penis 20 foot long. And we go, oh, really?
I'll buy that.
Fantastic. Click. Must be me. It's insane, isn't it? It's absolutely mental.
Yeah, it's psychology of fake news. The best fake news presents you with stuff that you inherently want to believe, that you have, that speaks to you in a way that it shuts down your rational brain, basically. And you just go, yeah, I like that idea, so I'll believe it. And that's when, if you've got, it's about sort of confirmation bias. So if you believe a particular thing, you read it online, say, and it doesn't matter what the source is, you read it and you go, well, other people feel this way. But then if there's an expert who feels that way, then you feel really validated.
Yeah.
And that's where bringing in the expert opinion is so important.
There's a quote about magic that I think is so true about like stuff like this as well. It's to those that believe, no explanation is necessary, and to those that do not, none will suffice.
Yes,
it's so true.
That's exactly.
If you see an article that aligns with your view, literally doesn't matter. You're like, it's there.
Yep.
It's there.
Even if you know in the back of your head, this is probably sus. Don't know what this website is, it doesn't matter. Yeah. You just get that sense that, oh, I feel good about this because
Professor John Smith from the University of Scarborough. Well, that sounds reputable enough for me. Whereas if you don't believe it, it doesn't matter how many, 500 scientists from Oxford and Cambridge.
What do they know?
Have all said it. Well, they're all in on it together.
Yeah, exactly. They're all in on it.
They're all in on it.
That's the other. I mean, that's the real sort of the sort of toxic problem of fake news now is that because there's myriad fact checking websites, right? You can go on a Snopes or something like that, and you can go, well, and they do really good work in saying, well, this article's garbage. But if you're already in that belief system, if you already believe that you're right and everyone else must be wrong, then the fact checkers are in on it as well. There's no one, because no one's objective. These people aren't objective. They're in on it. They're in on whatever this thing is.
Who bankrolls their website.
Yeah, exactly. It's all that. It's all that. It's a circular problem.
Oh, totally. I mean, I know a few people. I mean, I wouldn't go as far as to call them friends, but I know a few people through comedy who have gone down a real rabbit hole these past 15 months. Great reset, all this stuff. And you cannot reason with them. You cannot, because they're so entrenched in their own belief system that there's no getting them out of it. Yep. And anytime you show any evidence that is to the contrary, it's so easy for them to just write it off. It's so easy for them to just go, nah, that's been done by this person who's bankrolled by this person who's linked to this person. No, I'm not believing it.
It's a concept that in fake news is called the big lie, right? So this idea that if you create an alternative reality that's so all-encompassing and a truth that is so believable, then it cannot be assailed, it cannot be questioned. This is the point in every podcast when there's a historian where we hit that iceberg that's known as Adolf Hitler.
Oh, this is Hitler.
It's bound to happen. It's bound to happen. If you get a historian on a podcast, Hitler will turn up at some point. So here's Adolf.
And here he is.
Here he is.
A special third guest.
So the concept of the big lie is something that's often attributed to Hitler as being the guy who kind of perfects it. And he, back in the 1920s, so before he comes to power, he's talking about how the First World War was lost by Germany, not because of the military leaders or the war economy or anything else. It was lost because of the Jews and the socialists.
Really?
They're the ones who undid Germany from within. That's why we lost. And that's the big lie that kind of underpins the wider sort of Nazi propaganda that Goebbels then really, perfects in the 1930s, because from there you can extrapolate bigger lies, which is, well, the Jews are the reason why we lost the war, and the Jews are still financing, the British government, the American government, the French government. They're behind all of our enemies, and they are working against Germany. And then if you push that big lie enough, you then get a basis to start maltreating the Jews.
Did like the Nazis have fake news then?
Oh yes.
So in my head, like, fake news and propaganda are two different things. And when I think of propaganda, I think of like a Second World War poster of like a woman going shh like that, and it's like, don't talk because Hans might be listening.
Yeah,
just shh, something like that. The walls can hear, and all this, and it's like really, it's almost cartoony, and it doesn't pretend to like. So in my head, like, if you're like fake news article, it never explicitly says this is, this is the political leaning of my article. It always leads you to infer it. Whereas with propaganda, it's explicitly stated with cartoons and drawings, and like in my head, that's the difference.
Yeah, by and large, that's right. By and large, propaganda is more overt. It's in your face. Fake news is a bit more subversive.
Have we stopped using propaganda now? Because I haven't seen any. Maybe it's just become...
propaganda comes in different forms. It's arguable, for example. So I think there's a way to think about propaganda as something that is very it's so all-encompassing at this point that perhaps you don't even see it,
Yeah.
So it could be something as I don't know.
I mean, maybe when Boris put that thing on a bus and he said 350 million will go to
Yeah.
Maybe that's propaganda.
Well,
in terms of, it's more like the posters that there used to be, even though it got covered by... You're right, there's sort of a hybrid between them now, and you can't really distinguish one from the other.
I think perhaps there was probably another example was that poster that appeared on a lot of tube stations. This was a good couple of years back now, and it was the one of, if you see anything that doesn't look right, which is a way of, if you see a terrorist, basically, look out for it. And the picture was...
Tell someone, yeah.
It had a picture of someone who looked sort of dark-skinned, looked, they were sort of cast in shadow. They looked like they could be of Arabic descent, and it was stuff like that where you're just like, okay, this is sending me a message.
Yeah.
It's sending me a very clear message of what doesn't look right.
Yeah.
that's perhaps where propaganda sits now. In that, I mean, it does sort of bleed over into this thing where it's suggesting things through images. Propaganda isn't always about images, but images play a larger role in that. It's probably worth just kind of, because defining fake news is actually quite difficult, and there's a sort of debate over how we define fake news, what are the limits of it, because you're right, it does bleed over into propaganda, and these things kind of become similar. To my mind, if we're talking about fake news, we're talking about misinformation and disinformation. So there's two separate things. So if I say to you, okay, when we get out of here this afternoon, sky is going to clear up, clouds are going to go, it's going to be beautiful blue sky, it's going to get to 28 degrees. Lovely inside. It's gonna be Spain on the Mersey.
What a weird thing for you to say just as we leave.
Yep.
It's going to get to 28 degrees.
Yep. I've got a magic weatherman in my head, and he tells me that this is what's going to happen. So I tell you this, and I'm obviously lying. You know I'm lying. I know.
I'd believe you, genuinely. Like not even messing, because I have this thing with like people who I know that are smarter than me. They can pretty much get away with saying fucking anything, and I'd be like, yeah, okay, fair enough. Honestly, if you said it's going to go to 28 degrees, I wouldn't go, you're full of shit. I'd go, well, he knows about weather and things too. Like that's just what I'd infer from that.
Well, I'll remember that. Well, if I said that to you, and I just left it at that, I just said, this is what the weather's going to be, then that's misinformation. That's me knowingly giving you false information that I know is false, because I know it's actually going to be 15 degrees and bucketing down rain. But I'm telling you that as a just for no apparent reason.
Well, here's the thing. That's what would throw me. So the reason that I believe it is because no apparent reason. But if you were to say to me, it's going to get to 28 degrees later, and I'm selling sun cream, would you like some? I would go, that's odd. And that's what would twig it for me.
That is an example of disinformation. So misinformation is me just telling you something false without any real grand design or purpose. And fake news can take that form. It can just be, for the hell of it.
So why? What's the reason then? So what's the point of misinformation?
Well, misinformation, if you put enough of it out there, you can create a sort of a wider narrative. So if there's enough lies that are just put out there, then eventually you cloud people's reality. That's what we've seen, in recent years.
Oh,
in particular.
Totally.
You put out enough. Say if you put out enough relentless misinformation, it kind of reprograms people's brains.
I'll tell you what, I am shitting myself for, do you know, like deep fakes?
Yes.
Where they take, do you know about deep fakes? Deep fakes are when they take a video of somebody and they superimpose at the moment they just do it with celebrities, don't they? They superimpose a celebrity's head and it makes it look like a video of celebrities doing or saying things. But right now, it's really convincing. It's really good.
And it's come along leaps and bounds, because 3 years ago it was like, oh yeah, that's obviously the Queen talking about how much she enjoyed Love Island last night. It ain't convincing at all. But the level of sophistication in those has grown exponentially in just a few years, and it is terrifying.
And do you know what? It's dead funny as well, because when they were speaking to, I remember watching a video where they were speaking to somebody who made it. It was like a company that was specialised in it, and they were like, "Yeah, well, one of the things that we think would be really cool is porn, and you can have a porn tape of so and so, but it isn't them, and so it's not violating blah blah blah." And it's like, you do know that people are going to use this for the worst possible.
Yeah, they know.
Like, it's because the thing is right now, if I see a video of, say, let's take Matt Hancock as an example, who made the news and lost his job because he was caught groping his secretary during a crisis and breaking the rules that he helped to create. Now, right now, he doesn't have a leg to stand on. And everyone goes, off you pop, and he goes, fuck. And that's kind of the last vestiges of accountability in action. In 5 years' time, he's going to go, deep fake.
Yes.
And we're all going to go,
yes.
There's no way of proving otherwise.
Yes.
It's going to be, I tell you what deep fake is going to be to politicians. It's going to be what I've been track and traced is to me to estate agents.
It's the grand excuse.
Yeah, the grand excuse.
Well, we've already seen this. Trump has made it iconic that fake news. If I don't like it, it's fake news. That was his carrying cry. Now, admittedly, that hasn't been taken up by all politicians, but you saw during his time in office that there were other politicians, not just in the States but in other parts of the world, who kind of dip their toe into those waters. Like, can I?
Does this work?
Does this actually work? It's like I think I think Trump's unique in that for him it can work. I don't think it necessarily works with all politicians. He's not a politician, so it works for him.
His personality, isn't he?
Exactly.
It's the same with Boris.
Yeah.
It's Do you know what's crazy is that we got to a point. Someone said this on Twitter, right? And I honestly, when I read it, it made sense to me. What we have now with Trump and Boris and that is a direct result of fucking Chico and Wagner and all those fucking nutters that we kept voting in X Factor and Britain's Got Talent just because it was funny. It started with them. Oh, it's a bit of a laugh to keep him in because he's shit. Yeah. And now it's we'll just vote him in. It's
the same principle. Yeah. No.
It just got massively out of hand.
Yeah.
But I think these people they've cracked because people like to paint, especially with Trump and stuff, they like to paint them and Boris as like bumbling idiots. And I think it's very much the opposite in that I think they're the smartest people in the room to an extent. And I think that they've worked out that the general public only really gives a fuck about something for about 48 hours. And then what happens is something else happens. So we're not very good as human beings at like proportioning out our outrage. So we're not allowed to go, okay, 50% of my outrage goes to this, 20% goes to this, and 30% goes to this. I'm outraged about these three things right now.
Yep.
We don't do that. What we do is we go 100% of my fury here.
Yep.
And then and then something else happens. Then we go, oh, this is a new thing. 100% of my fury here. And then that bit gets forgotten about. And so they just have to ride it out till the next thing comes along.
Completely. Yeah. It's an intricate knowledge of the news cycle. That's what they get more than anything, and how accelerated it's become, and how attention spans have lowered, and the rate at which we're bombarded with information just increases and increases every single year. They understand that. They understand how to work that. And to go back to kind of what I was saying before about back in the day, part of what made the late 19th century this era where it felt like there was an onslaught of fake news coming through was that you had this explosion in it's the era when mass media as we understand it develops. Really from the 1850s onwards, you get people being able to print whatever they want. You get new advances in printing technology. You get these what's called jobber presses, which are just one man operated presses. Anyone can print anything. So it's kind of like your 19th century equivalent of a website, a blog, Facebook page. I can print whatever I want. I can disseminate it as widely as it can be passed around. Newspapers are very cheap. People are becoming more literate. There's no real standards on governing newspapers. Not proper ones anyway. And so anyone can print anything. And so for the first time in history, you've got large populations being assailed with information from all sides, countless newspapers, and they don't really know where to look. Similar to what's happening today. It's just obviously, the internet speeds all this up.
Well, this is it, because it used to be one cycle of press a day, didn't it? Like one newspaper every day, and then that's like, oh, today's newspaper is tomorrow's fish and chip wrapper. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's but now the cycle is continuous. It never stops. So if you're a big website, like for example, if you're somebody like Lad Bible, who, even though they started out as being like, hey, we're lads, we're just doing laddie things, oh, let's have a shot. Now they are as much of a news website as any of the others, I think. They put a lot of news stories out there. It's continuous. It's throughout the day. And so the news never stops or goes away. It's a constant stream. And I do think, like, if you're, talking about the 1850s or whatever, and people can just start a newspaper now, right? Let's say you wanted to start a newspaper. You were fucking, you know, Mr. fucking Mirror or whatever, and you're like, I want to start a newspaper named after me, Mr. Mirror.
That's how it started, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. Are you sure you don't want to make like reflective things that people can see the faces in, Mr. Mirror? Nah, mate. No, I want to make a tabloid. Day one, right? You start off and you've got a great story, and you fucking write it, and then you print it, and then it goes off. Day two, you go, all right, okay, I've got another great story. Day three, oh, fuck. Right, follow up on the first story. Great, okay. Day four, shit. Just make something up. Like, is that how...
Yeah, it's a beast that feeds itself, because obviously the point of these newspapers is to make money.
Yeah.
And so if you find that, you know, nonsense sells, then you'll produce more nonsense more regularly to sell more. It's kind of as simple as that. But what happens out of this process is that you get, and this is why this is a sort of formative time period for fake news as we understand it today, the more nefarious aspects of it come in. So the moon hoax thing I mentioned, that was just about money. That was just about, you know, getting circulation for the paper. In the 1890s in the United States, you get the growth of what became known as yellow journalism, which was basically tabloid journalism. So newspapers that had big sensationalistic headlines that were designed to grab your eye. They talked in really lurid language about, you know, this ghastly murder of this person has happened, or, you know, this you know, body with its, you know, head and legs missing has been found, you know, floating in the Hudson, and all this, and just, you know, really graphic sort of stuff to titillate, excite, get you in.
Yeah.
And they're very popular. There's an understanding amongst the readership that a lot of this is sensationalistic nonsense, but it's entertaining. A bit like what you're saying about the Trump Boris thing. You know, I know what this is, but it's entertaining, so I'll go with it.
But they understood it for what it was.
They understood it for what it was. I mean, by and large. But here's the thing about that. Do we ever actually understand anything? I don't think so. I don't think humans are that bright. So we can know when we're reading something that, well, this is nonsense. But if we read enough of it, it will reprogram.
Yeah.
And what happens with yellow journalism, it takes this turn for the worse and sort of sets a precedent, which we've seen to this day. In 1898, there's a U.S. warship called the Maine. It's moored in Havana Harbor in Cuba, and it blows up. Now, Cuba at the time is a Spanish colonial possession, and yellow newspapers, New York World in particular, they've been running these stories in the years leading up to the Maine about how the Spanish are these terrible, you know, colonial oppressors, how they torture people and murder people and all this kind of stuff. And then this U.S. warship explodes. And no one quite knows why. And so they kind of fill in the gaps and say, well, the Navy's saying that it might have been an accident, but we know from our sources that it was a Spanish mine, that it was a bomb, that they attacked us. Yeah. And they kind of ramp up all this jingoism and everything else. And America goes to war with Spain in 1898.
Whoa! Off the back of that?
It's a big part of the reason why. I mean, there's a wider process there where, you know, then as now there's a relationship between politics and the media. There are hawks in the U.S. government who feel that now is the time for America to sort of branch out and become a colonial power. Yeah. And then they've got this backing of the media who are riling up the public, all this kind of stuff. They end up going to war with Spain. They get Cuba. They get the Philippines. You know, job done, basically.
Yeah.
And yeah, this and you know, there was an official inquiry done which concluded that it was more than likely an internal explosion caused by, you know, the magazine exploding, or an accident in the coal room, something like that. But it didn't matter, because at that point you've already implanted the idea that something more sensational has happened.
I love how even 120 years ago they were still using according to our sources.
According to our sources.
I love how
naval officers on the inside who know what actually happened have told us. It's the same. That story always reminds me of the sort of armchair explosive experts who emerged after 9/11, who looked at the footage of the towers coming down and went, "Oh, well, that's not a structural collapse caused by a plane hitting it. That's a controlled explosion. It must be. They've wired the girders with
jet
explosion.
fuel doesn't melt steel beams.
It's all that, and that's when we've got footage, and that's when we can can actually dissect it. Back then in 1898, no one's seen this explosion, and yet here they were sort of suggesting, well, it must have been a mine, because there was such a dearth of knowledge. You could fill it with whatever. And the proprietor of one of these yellow newspapers, a fellow by the name of William Randolph Hearst, he really wanted a war, and so he kind of pushed this and was like, we can do this.
Do you not think, though, that, like, regardless of how much extra footage you get, like with 9/11 stuff where you can literally see it, it doesn't really matter, because I think what it plays to is that there's this weird human need to think that we understand things in a way that other people don't.
Yes.
Like, we have this weird need as human beings to be like, oh, well, actually, I figured it out.
Yes.
Like, I'm the right person. Doesn't matter that you were in fucking set 6 at school and you got a fucking E in fucking science.
Well, if anything, that's what's going to make you want to be the guy with the answers later in life.
Yeah.
It's that thing of, they said I was a mug then, but now I know the things.
So here's the thing, right? And I say this on like every podcast. I'm not sure if I've said it on film yet, but I say it like off film loads. Every expert that I speak to speaks in the same way. I was literally talking to you about this before, wasn't I? Every expert speaks in the same way. They never use generalized big terms or anything like that, and anything that they say comes with about 7 caveats. So they never go bees produce honey or something like that. They'll go, bees produce honey. Well, actually, it depends what you mean by honey. There's a certain amount of, I guess if you're talking about honey in the terms that we talk about honey, sort of supermarket honey, maybe that could only be, and it's like, just because it's just the way that they are. They self-edit as they go. You do the same thing. I'm sure that they self-edit because you're so smart. You're questioning yourself as you go. Whereas thick people go, this is a sentence that is completely true. And there's no caveats, none.
I think it's because because life's complicated, right? So there's most things do have caveats to them. There's always exceptions to rules. It's that stuff. Problem with that stuff is it's boring.
No one
wants to hear the caveats. They want the headlines in the yellow newspapers.
No one listens to terms and conditions.
No, God no.
That's why gambling adverts start off and they go dun 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 dun. Bet in play, win £1 million. Terms and conditions apply. BigGamblerWare.com with the fun stop.
With the fun stop.
And everyone goes, what was that? What?
Doesn't matter. Bright light, shiny stuff, money.
Yeah, you may lose your house. We will repossess your children and sell them into child slavery. Man. I think it's like, I don't know. I look at like the way that fake news is now, and I'm kind of surprised that it's been around for as long as you say it's been around, and no one's done anything about. But because in my head, there wasn't as much fake news in 1993 as there is now, and it feels like there's been a gap in history from, let's say, after the Second World War till Trump, where I didn't really know what fake news was. Like, if fake news has been around since 1835 or whatever, I would have imagined that I would have just grown up with it. And I don't feel like I have.
Well, there's a couple of reasons why. I think proportionally, there's not as much fake news back in, say, the 90s as there is now, because we didn't have the internet back then, and we didn't have numerous websites and everything else, and social media to help disseminate fake news. You had a set number of TV stations that had a set number of bulletins. There was always tabloids. There was always that stuff. There was always this royal scandal, that royal scandal, our insiders to say this. That's always been there.
But that, to me, felt like it was sensationalized. And I think that there's a difference between taking a story and making the very most of it, which I kind of think that journalists are allowed. I'm not comfortable with it, but I kind of feel like it's what they're allowed to do, because I kind of figure it's, that's their job. Whereas flat out making shit up, I feel like that wasn't around, before Trump, or if it was, then it wasn't around as much. Like, I feel like there was a boom.
It was, well, yeah. I mean, there's definitely been a boom. It's become a sort of self-perpetuating cycle at this point. But there has always been a sort of core of nonsense reporting and sort of non-stories that have worked their way into newspapers, sometimes for quite orchestrated and nefarious means. And this is where fake news gets a bit more sophisticated than just, I'm a newspaper proprietor, I think that we should have a war with Spain. They blew up our ship. It moves along, and what moves it along in no small part is actually the war. So during the Second World War, this, for some reason these guys never get enough attention, but Britain established a secret propaganda agency called the Political Warfare Executive, top secret group, and their job was to fight fire with fire against Goebbels, to sort of
come up with their own propaganda.
I
would have fucking loved that job.
I would have. They had some
it.
Characters on their roster. They had writers, poets, journalists, a number of alcoholics.
Let me tell you this: if I was in charge there'd be tits on everything. There'd be tits on fucking everything.
This is kind of what happened, sort of, in a very understated 1940s kind of way.
Ankle, a leg.
So the guy, one of the main guys in the Political Warfare Executive was I think one of Britain's unsung heroes of the war. No one knows who this guy was. He was a journalist called Sefton Delmer.
Oh, Sefton Delmer.
You've heard of Sefton Delmer?
No one knows who he is. He fell straight into it.
That was dead good. I liked that.
Thank you.
I liked that. Oh man, I was so excited for a second there.
You really went in with it as well.
Yeah, you broke my heart.
I broke your heart. I'm so sorry.
Some people know who he is, but most people don't. Anyway, so Sefton Delmer. So he was a journalist who, during the 1930s, when early 1930s, when the Nazis are rising to power, Hitler comes to power in 1933. So this is before then, when he's on the campaign trail, as it were. Delmer is a foreign correspondent. He's with Hitler and Goebbels when they're going to all these rallies, and he's seeing the diabolical genius of Goebbels. He's seeing how he's orchestrated these rallies so that everyone is hanging on every word Hitler says. Yeah. And Hitler's up there talking about how, if I get in, we're going to have a war. We're going to have this god-awful war. It's going to be fantastic. You're going to love it. And Delmer says to Hitler one day, he says in politer terms, he's basically like, you're this ugly, nasty little man saying ugly, nasty little things.
In polite terms?
Yeah, in polite terms. Reading between the lines, this is kind of what he was saying. Why do people like you? Why is everyone Sieg Heiling? Why is everyone into every single word you said? And Hitler comes back at him and he says, I understand that every person out there in the stadium has an innerer Schweinhund, an inner pig dog. They have a darkness in them.
Innerer Schweinhund?
Yeah, the inner pig dog.
Fucking hell, I love that.
Yeah. And he says, everyone's got a darkness in them. They've got, dark thoughts, nasty things, avarice, revenge, pettiness. They've got all this stuff in them that they know is wrong, but it's in them regardless.
So when I used to work at a call centre, right, when I was like 18, 19, and it was a call centre of like 500 people, and so there were fucking women having babies every fucking month and bringing them in, baby, like this, and they'd show it around, and I'd be on the phones as a 19-year-old going, don't fucking show me that baby. Don't fucking show me that.
This has been with you a while,
forever.
This is
yeah. Because I don't, in my head, there's nothing worse than fucking customer service and having somebody on your headset moaning and then another voice in my other ear going, punch that baby in the face. That's sensory overload to me. And I worry that, because my talking part is I don't want to talk to the wrong voice and go, no, I'm not punching the baby. Sorry, what were you saying about your car insurance? So it was a minefield.
This job lasts very long.
Honestly, about 18 months, I got sacked.
That's pretty good considering that's all going on. Yeah.
Mate, so when Hitler talks about Schweinhund, I'm trying to link it back in.
That's the thing. I mean, he got that fundamental flaw of human psychology and he exploited it. And when the war came, Delmer started working for the political warfare executive. He remembered what Hitler said. And so what he did was he set up a number of fake news radio stations that were broadcasting from Britain, but they broadcast under the guise of being resistance radio in, say, the occupied territories of Europe, or perhaps even radio in Germany, like a pirate radio station in Germany by anti-Nazis, and this was all made up. And he came up with one, the sort of jewel in the crown of these various radio stations. There were lots of them. Was one that he ran called Gustav Siegfried I, or GS1, where he developed this character who was called the Chief. And this was what was interesting, because he had to be anonymous, because the character was a really stiff-backed conservative German nationalist. He's like an officer in the army who wants Germany to win the war, wants the Reich to last forever, loves Germany, all this stuff. But, and this was the genius of it, he hated the Nazis.
Oh, okay.
So what Delmer did was he created this character who's like, I'm appealing to the inner pig dog of all you people who want Germany to be great and don't mind a war to get there. But you might not necessarily think Hitler's the bee's knees. But you see him as a means to an end. And he created this character to speak to these people. And this guy would engage in the most lurid stuff. He would tell stories he would say, the war should be going really well, but it's not. This is the chief speaking. The war should be going well, but it's not, because the Nazis are, injecting our boys, our brave fighting lads on the front with, infected blood that's got syphilis in it. That they've taken the blood from POWs. Or while our brave fighting lads are on the front, it was always our brave fighting lads on the front, because that's an easy get, pulls on the heartstrings.
It's a catchphrase, isn't it?
Yeah, completely. Brave fighting lads are on the front, and their officers are back at home, cheating on them with their wives, and stealing their money and all this kind of stuff. And, he spoke about, like the Nazi High Command having orgies in submarines and all this stuff, like really like over the top stuff to get home the point that, the Nazis are these depraved, horrible, corrupt people and all this. So he he combined this kind of, the sensationalism of, sex and violence with appealing to people's inner pig dog, you want to win the war, blah, blah, blah. But then he also used it to subversively attack the Nazis.
Do you know what?
Very clever.
Now you've mentioned it, I really want to see a war where there's no guns, there's no knives. The only way that you can kill the enemy is with syphilis blood. That you got to run around. You just got to inject people. Oh my God!
What a game would be up for that war. That sounds like such a difficult war.
What a game of tag that would be. What a fucking game that would be. Holy shit. You're allowed maybe like a bow and arrow that you have to like...
Yeah, it'd lead to innovation, like a multi-barreled syphilis syringe gun that you just sort of fire that scatters it across a wide area.
It'd be like jackets of people like dressed like hedgehogs, but with little fucking syphilis.
Just running into each other.
And they just run around like
people.
Ball into each other and melee and shit. I want to watch that. Who doesn't want to watch that? Oh, mate.
Set it up.
So what sort of like articles? Did they print articles, Nazis?
Yeah, article during the Second World War, there was this sort of propaganda battle between the Nazis and the British, and then when the Americans come in, they had their own propaganda unit as well. And to be honest, most of the battling was done through radio, because that was then as now, today, if you want to be a fake news entrepreneur, the internet is what you use. You use the latest technology, and back then radio was the bee's knees. But that said, the first, here's a fun fact: the first air raid conducted by Britain during the Second World War didn't drop bombs; it dropped pamphlets.
Oh, right.
This is September 1939. They dropped pamphlets over Germany, which were propaganda pamphlets that said, well, they weren't that clever, because they basically said, German people, Hitler will lead you into disaster. He's a bad guy. Please don't fight in the war. And the problem with this, and this is true of fake news to this day, it has to somehow speak to some kind of reality, even if it's a reality that's just in people's heads, even if it's just some constructed assumption.
Yeah.
But the problem with some of the early propaganda efforts by the British was they kept saying, Hitler's a bad guy and he's insane and all this, and if you're an average German looking around, you go, well, hang on a minute, he's reclaimed all these territories, he's knocked off the French in 6 weeks. We're sitting pretty. The Russians aren't in the war yet. The Americans aren't in the war yet. We're doing pretty well, thanks. I think this guy might be all right. And so none of it worked. And to be honest, I mean, it's very questionable if any of this propaganda worked during the war. That Germans obviously fought on to the bitter end. So the idea of these propaganda efforts sort of subverting people, a lot of British propaganda, particularly towards the end of the war, and the sort of fake news stories that they dropped were designed to undermine morale.
So hold on a minute. So I've always been taught in school and stuff that propaganda was exceptionally successful. It was like this. It was like a super tool, and you're saying that actually didn't really work.
Well, in the First World War, it was probably a bit more successful.
Are we talking about? Was it successful in terms of keeping our morale up? Was that?
Oh yeah. I mean, that's a different form of propaganda. So that's the stuff on the home front. I mean, again, that's debatable. I think the sort of school version of it is that everyone rallied behind Churchill and blah blah blah, and that's not necessarily true.
This is it. The school version. So the last I heard of it was that people were like, "Oh, good grief! We're really fond of this Churchill chap, but tell you what, it's quite. Oh, is that a poster? Oh, keep going.
Yeah.
I think I will. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
and it was as easy as that.
No. I mean, it was not as simple as that. And a lot of the propaganda posters developed to boost morale here were just laughed off the walls. People were just like, bollocks. I'm not listening to that.
The one about the walls have ears one I always thought was weird. Do you know what I mean? And it was like two women gossiping, having a coffee, and then there was like a dude in a Nazi uniform, just like, oh, what's that? And you tell me you didn't notice fucking Hitler in the tea room? What the fuck are you on about?
Sink ships and all that stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very hard to assess propaganda. And I mean, it was easier here because we've got data to suggest it. But the stuff that was put into Germany, it's really hard to assess how successful that was. A, because it was a lot more ambitious than the kind of let's just keep people's morale up propaganda that was being here. And B, because, demonstrably it didn't have much of an effect, at least on a wide scale. Now, there might have been some instances where, you might have gotten a couple of Wehrmacht soldiers to desert because they were scared because I mean, particularly in the run up to D-Day, they were dropping, because they drop fake newspapers, the British would, and as well as these fake news radio stations broadcasting stuff saying, oh, the Russians have, because I mean, these are German soldiers stationed on the French coast. They don't really know what's going on, so you send them propaganda saying, the Russians have broken through this and they're coming to get you. They're right behind you. They've made it to Berlin. All this and stuff like that. And there were a lot of stories in the run up to D-Day when the Germans kind of knew it was coming. They really aggressive propaganda saying, we're already there. There's already, American commando groups sneaking into Wehrmacht barracks and slitting your throats while you sleep.
Were they scared of Russia the most then?
Oh, yes.
Were they?
Yeah, wouldn't you be?
No. I'd be scared of America more if I was German.
Well, if you're looking at it through a Nazi lens, you'd be more scared of the Russians because they were the Untermenschen, they were subhumans.
Really?
In the way that the Nazi propaganda positioned them was that, the Slavic peoples on the sort of racial totem pole, they're below the Anglo-Saxons, which is the British, the Americans. The Americans are horrible because they're decadent and they're capitalists and all this kind of stuff. But
these are barbarians
and they're liberal. But that's the key
barbarians.
Term. They're the barbarians from the east. They're the hordes from the east, and that's how they were kind of depicted again in the German propaganda that was anti-Soviet propaganda. They're not only, I mean, and on top of everything else, there's the racial element. There's also they're communists.
Yeah.
They're the antithesis of Nazis.
They share things.
Yeah. These people, are
fucking savages sharing.
Absolutely beyond the pale. So no, the Germans were absolutely terrible. If you were a German soldier and you were told, and you'd been, living it up in occupied Paris, and you were told, right, you're off to fight on the Eastern Front, you
Shit your pants.
Yeah, completely.
Do you know what? I swear to God, because I quite like the idea of the Second World War.
Love me a Second World War. Love it.
Who doesn't love a sequel? What I meant is that I quite like learning about it and stuff like that. But I swear that what you get taught in schools is literally not anything like what happened. So in my head, right, and I wasn't thick in school, so but this is knowledge that's sort of stuck around that I haven't really needed to access for a long time. But I swear I got taught at school that they were fighting on several fronts and it was really cold in Russia and they were all dead cold, and that's kind of why they lost, because they were all really cold and stretched.
It contributed.
Yeah, but
it doesn't help.
Oh, yeah, he's so cold. I cannot fire my gun. He's so cold. That in my head is kind of what happened. And then they were fighting on different fronts and they were stretched, and then everything fucking collapsed.
And then Churchill rode into Berlin on a big bus emblazoned with Union Jacks.
Yeah, and then they looked up at the moon and there was a dude with fucking shitloads of flamingos and people with bat wings and shit, and they were like, oh, fuck this. It's just not worth living. But yeah, and then something happened with Belgium. I think it took longer to get through Belgium than was originally anticipated. I think I can somehow remember something called the Schlieffen Plan being a fucking thing.
That's the First World
War.
Fuck! Yeah, no, that's
all
fine.
around.
Well, I mean, it's fine. You know, Belgium's in both. They get mucked around by the Germans in both.
Do you know, I went to so when I was at school, we went to a school trip. We went to Ypres, and we went to like Flanders Fields and shit like that. And I was 15. And I could not have given less of a shit about Flanders. And we went so we went into the museum, and then they went, you have to go in the museum, but then once you've finished in the museum, then you can spend the rest of the day doing what you want. Mm-hmm. And so age 15, what me and my mates did is we walked straight through the museum, did not look at a single thing, went straight out the door, and then went to the supermarket and got wine and got pissed. So we got pissed in Ypres in Belgium. Also, there was loads of chocolate shops as well.
Yes.
And they gave us loads of free things, and they were psyched that we were English. And we got told by our history teachers, and again, I think this is bollocks, but we got told that they really like English because of like war and shit like that, and they were more on our side.
It's an oversimplification, but yeah.
Because I've been to Belgium several times, right?
Okay, I was going to say, have you ever gone back and been to that museum?
So I've been to. Oh, I've never gone back to the museum. Fuck that shit. No. I'd sooner go to the park bench where I fucking threw up €3 wine. It wouldn't have been euros; it would have been francs. That's how long ago it was. So I've been back since, and I always find the Flemish side of Belgium fucking cool, and the French side of Belgium is full of cunts. Like Brussels side. Dickheads, like Bruges, fucking incredible.
Yeah, Bruges
Antwerp, Genk, it's where that is fucking brilliant. The fucking French bit, oh dear Lord, they're pricks. Do you know what I mean? And as well, I'm somebody. I've travelled all over Europe, so I'm somebody who genuinely tries to make an effort to ingratiate himself into the culture and the language and stuff like that. I think it's important. I am not somebody who goes into a fucking shop and is like, I am English, help me. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm not that guy. I try. So, but when you go to a fucking thing in, France or Brussels, and you're like, un billet, s'il vous plaît? They look at you like...
Oh, yeah.
They look at you like, I don't know what you could possibly want. Yeah. And it's like, really? Really? You're telling me at the train station, and I'm asking for un billet, s'il vous plaît? You haven't got a fucking clue what that might mean, you prick.
It's the eternal game. It's the eternal game that's played between French speakers and English speakers, where it's, we know what you're saying, even if you're making a valiant attempt. Your accent's a little bit off.
Yeah, it's not quite right.
Sorry, not happening.
Yeah,
it's never going to change. It's never going to change that. Yeah, it's a fun.
Sorry,
fun
man from Preston. Yeah. You can't properly. It's like I can barely speak English properly, for fuck's sake. Oh mate, it does my fucking tits in. Hey, do you know what's interesting? So I used to be a teacher. There's a fact for you. I used to be an English teacher as well, right? So what started to build into the curriculum now is fake news. And I used to devise little exercises for kids where I would give them fake news articles and real news articles, and they would be able to tell which is which with about 95% accuracy. That's were
encouraging.
Miles better.
These are actual newspaper articles. These are like
yeah.
That's good. That's encouraging, because by and large, we're not very good at spotting fake news. I mean, this is more on online fake news is harder to spot. I did a similar thing with first year students at uni, actually getting them to look at websites. What's sus about this website? Is there anything sus about it? That sort of thing. And by and large, they're pretty good at that. But
I was teaching kids who could not spell Liverpool. Do you know what I mean? Like thick, sorry for want of a better term, but kids who are not academically capable, kids who would struggle reading the newspaper article. And they certainly wouldn't be able to do any sort of comprehension with it or anything like that, not to a good degree, but they would know almost instinctively what is real and what is fake, because they've grown up with it. They are native to this language in a way that we aren't. So I might get tripped up every once in a while. They called it almost perfectly.
Yeah, I think there's something in that. I mean, my students are actually pretty bright by and large, to be honest. I was not overly surprised when they tweet this, and I did sort of introduce very what's the word, like sophisticated fake news websites. And they do spot them, and I do wonder if there's something in that where, because of their a generational thing, they're more attuned to it. But then there's a counter to that, which is also that, because we teach a lot about sort of critical thinking skills, about the ability to look at a source and go, is that legit? Should I use that? And that's something that I think, if you want to talk about if there's a way to combat fake news, and it's arguable that there is, but that's where you start, is with a basic questioning of it. And that's something that's always been taught in universities. Interesting that they're now doing it in schools.
I'll say two things to that, right? The first thing is that you're teaching the top, let's say the top 5% of society, or the top 10% in terms of brains. And I'm pretty sure, although you might tell me otherwise, I'm pretty sure that fake news isn't designed to catch the really clever people. It's designed to catch most people who are average or below average intelligence.
Yes.
So it's never about catching these people out, because they're almost too smart to be caught out by it.
Yes.
And the second thing is that if you sit down and you say to me, listen, we are going to do an exercise right now called Guess Which News is Fake News, then I switch on my hyper analytical fucking sense. Do you know what I mean? And I don't have that throughout the day 24/7, because it's exhausting to fucking look at the world through that lens. But you can switch it on for an hour whilst you're doing an exercise or something like that. So a lot of times I think fake news catches you off guard. You're having a shit in the morning and you don't have that hyper analytical lens on. You're just reading something to distract the feeling of poo falling out your anus. Do you know what I mean? Like, and so that got weirdly graphic, didn't it?
Yeah, very.
Do you know why?
Suddenly weirdly graphic. Yeah.
Do you know why? It's because the other day I went into the toilet and this is so weird that this is in my head. I went into the toilet and I forgot my phone. My phone was on my bed, and I went into the toilet. I just sat on the toilet and pooed, and I hadn't done that in such a long time. Like I always distract myself with something.
Oh,
to
I
read.
see what you mean.
And so I was just sat there feeling poo come out of my bum, and I was like, "This is horrible." So I got the toothpaste, and I started reading the back of the toothpaste to distract myself from that thought. How mental is that?
That is someone who is addicted to their phone. that is like next level addiction that I can't even comprehend.
Yeah,
wow.
The ingredients of toothpaste was very much my methadone to get me. Yeah, nuts. absolutely fucking nuts. So, I mean, I would say that the generation that are coming through, the teenagers now, because they've grown up on it, they're fucking great at it. And what's weird is that I would ask them, like, how do you know that that's fake? How do you know? And they just knew. There was something intrinsic about the language or the setup or the website or a mix or an amalgamation between all of those things that they could just go, yeah, there's something not right in there.
Yeah.
And again, these are kids who aren't like, going to be, some of them might not get a GCSE in English, but they could do that no problem at all. So part of me does think that going forward that, and maybe that is the case, that when you're hyper exposed to something, you become hyper resilient to it.
Yeah, that's one theory. The problem with that theory, though, is that what really drives fake news is, in many respects, the appeal to what we were talking about before, like the confirmation bias and the fact that you might know that it's nonsense, but you're still kind of brought along for the ride because it appeals to your instincts. And that's the real issue, is that you could have all the critical thinking capacity in the world, but if you come across a story that gets the inner pig dog, at that point, then you're going to your critical thinking skills are going to be diminished, if not completely out the window, and you're going to be taken with it. And that's the thing. People who are developing fake news know that, and so they work increasingly on that level of trying to sort of get to the heart of what really makes people frightened or angry, or what, primal emotions.
It's literally still how it operates on the innere spinal hunger.
Yeah, it's the same. It's the same principle. It's a fact of the human condition. It's just the way we're wired. And the danger is that when you get someone like Goebbels along, who knows how to exploit that, that's when bad things happen. Who
is the modern day Goebbels? I mean, you're not great with modern day.
There's about 20 of them.
Well, that sounds bad.
It's
like Roger Moore or something.
Roger Moore?
No, not Roger Moore. He was Bond, wasn't he? Wasn't Roger Stone? Roger Stone, not Roger fucking Moore. Yeah. I had Sean Connery. He's another bad one.
Sean Connery. Yeah,
Pierce Brosnan can fuck off.
Yeah.
And I don't trust anything Daniel Craig says.
They're all in on it. Yeah.
Fucking Roger Moore. Roger Stone.
No, I think you're thinking of Steve Bannon is the one. He was the one who was kind of the.
Didn't he do Breitbart?
Yes, he's all that stuff.
Did you read Fire and Fury? No. Did you? I read it.
I can guess what was in there because it's every column that had been written basically in the.
I read it, and I read it. I listened to it as an audio book, which is how I consume a lot of stuff because I'm driving all the time. But as I was reading it, I just remember thinking, "Oh, Jesus Christ!"
Yeah.
Like, if even a third of this is true, then my God,
it won't be the last book of that type. We'll have decades of these books coming out.
You reckon?
Oh yeah. A lot of money to be made in there.
Do you know what I think we are destined for decades of? I think we are destined for decades of movies about a mysterious virus. I think we're going to get loads of those.
It'll take a while. We'll need a breathing space.
5 years, 5 to 10 years.
It'll kick in.
And then it'll be mysterious virus time.
Yeah.
And it'll be. Do you remember when there was a glut of vampire films? It's going to be like that, but oh God,
maybe it'll get rid of zombie films. Maybe it'll finally.
Zombie films need to fuck off, don't they?
Get played out.
Or they should make a zombie film that follows the same narrative as COVID. So what usually happens with most zombie films is that they, like, if you think about, like, for example, I Am Legend, they find a vaccine. And that's the end. So what we need a zombie film where they find a vaccine.
And everyone goes, no, that's not a vaccine.
I don't trust it.
That'll make me into a zombie.
No, that'll make me zombie. I don't want you tracking my movements.
That's
and so that's
probably going to happen.
The whole film is just them trying to convince them, no, it is safe, honestly.
No, I can see that.
Before we wrap up, by the way, and we're going to take a quick break and then we're going to film a Pigoted Extra, which is just for our Patreons. And thank you, by the way, for everybody that has signed up to Patreon already. You can do so at patreon.com/Pigoted. And what happens is when you sign up to Patreon, you get loads of extra stuff. You get early release access access to episode. You get access to the Discord servers where we get to talk about episodes and stuff. There are extra episodes. So you get to listen to Pigoted Extra, which is extra content with our guests. There's merchandise options. There's discounts. There's loads and loads of good stuff. And it starts from £3 a month. And by signing up to the Patreon, what it means is that you are helping to support the podcast and helping to cover the costs in terms of the recording and the editing and all of that stuff. So thank you to everybody that has signed up to be a Patreon so far. I'm genuinely blown away by all the people that have. And if you are enjoying the podcast, consider signing up, because the more people we get, the more that we can carry on creating great content. Before we get shooting, Dr. James Crossland, is there anything that you want to plug?
What do I have to plug?
When's your book coming out?
Oh, that's not going to be till next year, I'm afraid.
Oh, right, okay.
You have to get me back.
2022?
Yeah, it'll be 2022.
Have you decided what the title is going to be?
It's going to be called The Rise of Devils.
That is a great title. That is a fucking
Well, it's actually,
banger.
I'm ripping off the Pope. Because the Pope back in the 1870s, the Pope said, these terrorists coming up, they're devils risen up from hell. So
really? That
plagiarizing the Pope.
It sounds like a very Pope thing to say, isn't it?
I mean, it's suitably dramatic. Yeah.
The devil's raising up from hell.
Yeah.
That was
how fearful he was of all this.
Really?
Yeah.
Fucking hell.
People, revolutionists, insurrectionists.
Do you know what? They said the same thing about heavy metal, though, didn't they?
Yeah, exactly. And that turned out fine. So yeah,
basically, what you need to do is we need to give these terrorists a bit of breathing space, and they will come back in 20 years with some fucking banging albums. Right.
But otherwise, follow me on Twitter at Dr. J Crossland.
Sweet. We're going to record Pigoted Extra. Thank you very much for watching and listening. Hopefully subscribe if you are enjoying the podcast, and we will see you again next week. Bye-bye. This episode of Pigoted is sponsored by Taylor's Toys. Taylor's Toys are a sex toy company. They specialise in doing high-quality sex toys that won't fall apart after 1 or 2 uses. Head over to taylorstoys.co.uk, check out the amazing range that they've got on offer, and if you use the discount code PIGOTED at checkout, you get yourself 10% off on all products. Taylor's Toys. Spice things up in the bedroom. Thank me later.